All right, guys. Well, let's go ahead and get started here. Thanks for taking some time out on your Friday afternoon. Hopefully everybody's dealing with our quarantine for COVID-19 well, and nobody's going too stir crazy. We'll hopefully have a good time here over the next hour, trying to provide some updates on the regulation changes and a couple of other FAQs and our new permitting system that Stuart Lamp, who's been gracious enough to join us, will be able to give us some little insight on. So as Chuck has said in the chat, if you have any questions opposed to piping up, just type those into the chat so everyone can see, and Chuck will be keeping an eye on that for us so we don't get bogged down with audio communications there. So shoot those messages over in the chat, or the questions over in chat, and Chuck will pipe in and we'll get those answered for you. So just so everybody knows who I am, because I'm sure everybody knows who Chuck is. I am currently the racing operations manager for USA Cycling. I work both with Chuck and Liz Kolar in both our technical and our collegiate programs. I have been really involved in the sport for, going on 12 years now. And as you can tell, I'm not crazy old, but got my mountain bike international commissary license in 2018. So my expertise is in the off-road disciplines. I now live in North Carolina, so just moved back, which is home for me. Just moved back here from Colorado about 2 months ago, right before quarantine kicked off, and looking to see what we can make happen here, and hopefully we can get back to racing here soon. So before we get started, Chuck or Stuart, do you guys have anything you want to add? Or
hello.
We are recording this, and this will be posted. So if anybody misses it, we'll have this up on the website here. It usually takes us a few days to get it cleaned up and posted.
Alrighty. Can everybody see on the screen share the 2020 rules update main page?
No sound.
Yep.
Perfect. Alrighty. So just as we get started here, hopefully we can get back to racing soon around the country. We obviously don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or a month or a year from now. So whenever we do get back to racing, the best way we handle these rules updates is through our sport committee and through you guys being in the field. So don't ever hesitate to reach out, whether it's to us directly or to your sport committee members. And the thing I always like to say, if you see something, say something. That obviously goes for a lot of things in life, but specifically with regulations, sometimes we write them and don't always see the ramifications they have in the field. So if you see something, say something, and we'll see what we can get done. And just as a kind of an overall update, most of the regulations for 2020 were simply clarifications due to the UCI updating their international regulations. So we tried to match our regulations as close as possible. So we'll kick this off with Stuart. Give us an update on the new permitting system.
Yeah, all right. I hope you'll have a good meeting.
You muted yourself there, Stuart.
Now you can hear me, hopefully.
There we go.
Yeah. So the reason why I'm on my phone is I usually freeze about 15 times during these meetings thanks to the internet service. So I'm opting for this in hopes that I can survive 10 minutes without you getting a funny image of me in a frozen state. As Justin mentioned, my role in this meeting today is to go over the permitting system and really how it impacts officials. There's for those who aren't aware, that are not involved with their local association or signing officials, over the past year, starting last June, we took on the project of creating a new permit system and picking up the pieces of what we had tried to do previously in creating a new permit system. And we've now rolled this new system out. So you'll hear me refer to this as next gen, and that's what we're calling the permit system. For 2020 events moving forward. Any event that's permitted from now until the end of the year will be on next gen. So any organizer will go through the new process. For those that have already been permitted, or that we would modify permits for based on a postponed or canceled date, those will actually still be on legacy. So we will keep legacy alive for that purpose. And so how this impacts
What do you do with it now?
is for one, there will be two interfaces that we'll deal with for a brief period of time. And so this is hopefully, looking at the slide today, this will show you the new interface and show you that the chief referee will actually be assigned in next gen. We won't post entire crews for the permits because we do want the centralized point of contact for the officials crew listed on the permit. So this screen the screenshot that you're seeing right now, this is the event queue from the event queue. And this is what the opening screen looks like for an event permit in the next gen system. And for any chief referee or officials assigner, whether it be a USA Cycling employee for mountain bike events or the officials coordinator for any of the local associations, they will see this screen and they'll click on that pre-event tab that you see that's highlighted in blue. And then from there, you'll also click on the referee assignment tab just below that. That takes you to where we have the chief referee assignment available. The system's very simple to use from this perspective. So you would just type in the official's ID number. So that's their license or account number with USA Cycling. And when you do that, the official's name is going to pop up. There's the next screen. Justin, if you can go ahead and move that forward. So in the next screen, you type the ID number, then you'll see the card pulls up. In this situation, you see my name. And when if this is the official that you want to assign to the event, you'll click on the Save Referee, and then it automatically assigns that person to these two events or these two dates. Now we do have series permits that are involved in this as well, and you'll be able to modify and assign officials for particular dates. That will, because we know those events change chief referees often throughout the year in a lot of areas, so we want to be able to provide flexibility with that. You'll notice on here that that where it says assigned, that is in green. And the reason for that is to show that that official has met all the requirements, passed safe sport, passed the criminal background check, and that they are clear and eligible to work the event. So this is how we will go in to provide chief referees with access to the post-event form that we are very close to rolling out. So we should have that rolling out sometime next week in this system. And then at that point, for everybody's sake, we're going to do some educational webinars just like this. We'll do one for event organizers, and then we also plan to do one for officials and local associations around not only the assignment of the officials, but also the assignment or how to access the post-event form and complete that process. So we'll walk you through that. We'll be able to record that and share that with you. So, all right, and I'm pulling up, Chuck, are there any questions you want me to address from the chat?
No, I think I'm getting the clarification. The questions that have come up is this does not replace the assignment tool. This is an extension of something you all have not seen in the past, which is it's how we assign you as a chief referee to the permit. so that you can go in and, number one, see the details going into the event. So you'll know times and see the flyer and all that good stuff. And then on the back end, it gives you access for the post event. So it's not an assignment tool. And there are multiple people who can go in and assign the referee. That can either be our staff or the local association, depending on who's doing the assigning for the event. For instance, for national championships and national calendar, it would be USA Cycling Office. For local and regional races, this could be done by the local association. For mountain bike, it would be done by our event services team. Missy asked about availability on the mobile app. No, this will be a web-based. You will be able to use a web interface on like an iPad to do it. We're making all of our websites mobile savvy, Missy, but it is not it's not web app, or sorry, it's not app native yet. And you want to answer that from Robert Stewart in regards to people appearing who are not approved?
Yeah. So for this, Robert, and again, this is a little bit different than the actual assignment, or at least people being able to sign up for it. This is officially where you have gone in, either an officials coordinator or USAC staff has gone in to assign the official. If the official appears, let's say they haven't completed one of the requirements needed, whether that's the background check or safe sport or any other requirement necessary, they'll show up in red. But we have to go through and make sure that we get them through these processes to make sure they're valid when it comes time for the event. So this is the color and the ability to track this helps us monitor these issues far greater than we've been able to in the past.
And JD asked a question about giving the event directors. JD, we'll cover that in the post event as well. Once we get to that and we do a webinar, there's basically a dialogue function built into the new permitting system that allows dialogue within the permit between the local association, chief referee, and our staff internally. So folks will be able to track, changes or other items in that system.
Yep. Cool. Well, thanks, Stuart. And if anybody has any other questions there, just go ahead and shoot them over to the chat, and Stuart may pop off, but if anything comes up, we'll make sure it gets over to him so we can get those answered for you.
All right. Thank you.
So moving on, just wanted to do a brief update on our officials webpage. We've put a lot of effort into updating this page, trying to create a one-stop shop for all of our officials. Some of the most recent updates have been to include a list of national champions, national records for easy update or for easy access, as well as a membership FAQ, which we'll touch on a little bit later. But as you can see on the screen, each of those circled icons are on every single page that links from the officials homepage. And each of them will give you access to those specific items. The assignments and resources will be the most usable on a day-to-day basis, especially at events. The resources tab, like I said, will include that list of champions and records. Once we record this and all future webinars and clinics, it will be posted on the clinics, webinars, and summits tab, just to be that central information area for learning continuing ed. If you haven't already, go ahead and just poke around that page. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or if you see something that's not up there, feel free to reach out to us. This is your page, so help us help you. And if you want it, likely somebody else does. So if we don't put it up there, there's a good reason, but feel free to go ahead and pass it along so we can get that put up. Alrighty, on every page that's linked from USA Cycling, you'll see on that top row that's highlighted resources tab. That will be a central location of pretty much all best practices, FAQs, forms, pretty much anything that you could actually need, whether you're an official, a bike racer, or anything. You'll be able to find that. So on the left-hand side, you can see those different types or different selection criteria that you can search your or filter your searches. So that's a very centralized location of really anything that you may need. If it's not on the officials page, it should be there. So just as a little update or a little example, if you highlight the FAQs page, it's only going to highlight the documents that have been selected as FAQs. For example, the e-bike FAQ, which we'll also touch on just a little bit. So if you have any of those, feel free to, or if you have any questions or anything, start at that resources page and the officials page, and that'll by far be your best resource to try to find those informations. So how are we doing, Chuck? We looking good? Perfect. All right, so chapter 1, our old general regulations. In 2019, we had quite a few staff changes, especially in our membership department, and with new staff comes new ideas and programs. One of the biggest changes that we made was our standard membership license process is now actually on a rolling membership. So if a rider purchases their license for the first time on March 31st, their license is going to expire the following March 31st. Unlike the standard domestic license and international licenses that we've always seen, where they'd expire on January 1 or expire on December 31, regardless of date of purchase, the membership department decided that this was a much more user-friendly license type, just because it would roll on. If they're typically racing in one half of the year, they get that same time next year. As I said, the international and technical licenses, which include the officials, mechanics, domestic drive coaches, and others, remain unchanged. So whether it's purchased or regardless of when it's purchased, it still is going to expire on that December 31st. But we do still hold the right to give certain promos and allow early purchases for those types, such as the 2XCX promo that you guys have probably seen in the past. There are now multiple levels of licenses. Before I describe those, this is just a note. In the field, there's no need to verify the type of license that a rider holds. You only need to verify that category that the rider is trying to enter at the event. So what I mean is we now have a standard and a premium license. The standard license will typically be purchased by adults only. It's a lower cost, and it's only allowed for a rider to enter into a category 5 or novice, which we'll touch on in a bit, category. The other type of license is the premium, which would be purchased by adults, juniors, and collegiate. Any junior and or collegiate license is automatically a premium, and it allows those riders access to any category as long as they're eligible for it. As I mentioned with the collegiate, in the past, you would typically see a rider hold a collegiate and a domestic or collegiate and an international license. That's no longer needed. They now only need to purchase that collegiate license, and it allows them to race in any event, whether it's collegiate or domestic. And again, we're only going to be concerned about the category on the license, not the type of license that they do hold. For a simplification of categorization for new riders and new members, we have changed the categorization of Cat 5 for all disciplines and Category 3 for mountain bike from those numeric categories to a novice description. This was so those new riders would have an identifiable name as to where to start. As a new rider, how do I know where to start? What does Cat 5 mean? So we've gotten rid of that and added in a novice category to allow for those new members to understand. This was a purposeful simplification. We also made some updates to our upgrade system. Riders can now upgrade from novice to Cat 4 without or basically on their own at any point in time just by logging into their system. The other upgrades through the numeric system from 4 on down to 1 did see some additional changes, more so minor. But if you'd like to look more into that, it's going to be in policy 8. So it's no longer in the regulations. We removed those last year. So take a look at policy 8, which can be found on the regulations page. This was a simplification, or the upgrades process was simplified for the athlete to make it a little bit easier to progress, but not any less safe for the events or the officials. Let's not stop scrolling here. The last piece on there is just a clarification on our youth category. The youth category used to state that it was just 9 and under, but for clarification, it has been changed to riders 8 and younger to include that 8-year-old. And a update on the status of youth races. These are for youth riders and youth riders only, as well as the fact that youth riders can only enter youth races and youth races can only contain youth riders, meaning a youth rider cannot enter a junior race. There's safety issues there, so we want to make sure that that's explained. And those youth categories are only open to 6 through 8 years old. Any questions on that, Chuck, in the chat?
I'm answering as we go. So
Fantastic.
I'll keep plugging away on the chat. So if you guys
Perfect.
pay attention to that, I'll let you have it.
Perfect. So I'll just keep rambling unless you pipe up that there's a question we need to answer. So these are the license types that are now printed. You'll see this in our membership guide that I'll touch on next as well. This was added to the resource page. Again, as you can see, there are 4 different license types, but on the bottom is where the categories are. That is the only thing that is actually important. A standard license cannot have a category 4 on it. So you just need to verify those categories when a rider is presenting it at registration to determine what category they're allowed to enter. But just as a very brief explanation, the vertical licenses are standard and a blue top. Any other premium license is going to have that red top. The junior license, just for ease of finding in the field, it's going to be a vertical in red. That's the 3rd license type there, which you'll see for those riders 18 years and younger. So we'll go ahead and move on. This is just the front cover of the membership guide, which I said is linked on the resources page on the main resources link on the home page, as well as the resources and assignments tool on the officials page. It has a great wealth of information for new riders and officials alike. So if you see anybody in the field that has any questions, go ahead and pass them along to this. It's got some great information and it's all linked in one area. It'll also show our new version of the Printed International, which was an update from the UCI. And we actually are now printing some hard copy plastic licenses. So we're actually in the 21st century, like some of the other federations. Alrighty. So moving on to what I think is one of the cooler regulation changes for 2020. The top one is just in regard to our permitting system change. We've gotten away from the A through E system, and it's actually going to a system more along the lines of UCI National Championships are one category. The second category is going to be for those events that have a prize list of $5,000 or greater, and then everything else falls into a lower bucket. For those events that have a prize list of $5,000 or greater, if a rider who is a current national champion in that field category and discipline, they do have that ability to wear their jersey in the race and request a refund from the promoter. But it's only going to be if it's in that exact category. The regulation itself hasn't changed, just the type of permitting or the permit level that we're now using. The next piece is, like I said, that really cool piece. We've actually changed this, which states that we are now requiring, and that's a soft requirement for national champions to represent their national championship jersey in the subsequent event that if they do compete in, and if they're still eligible. This is a hard and fast regulation for our elite and UCI categories. It's going to be a softer regulation for our more amateur categories, so juniors and masters categories, just because we do understand specifically at TTs, they may not have a national championship skin suit, and they may want to just wear their team skin suit. So if any questions come up at a national event, just pass those riders along to USAC staff, and we'll approach those as necessary. So as you may have seen, if anybody watched the live stream or was in Washington at the Cyclocross National Championship, this was the first time this regulation was actually put into play. So as you can see, Stephen Hyde and a few others actually did wear their reigning national championship jersey. It allows that John Q public to recognize who was the winner last year and who is defending. And it allows them to represent their jersey one last time. Of course, unless they win, they get to keep it for one more year. So move on to our next point. E-bikes. Chuck is going to cover most of this. He's a little bit more familiar. But overall, we wrote in the e-bike regulations basically to provide some oversight as to when and what type of e-bikes are allowed into USA Cycling competitions, and also making sure that it's understood that an e-bike is still not technically allowed at an event that does not have a specific e-bike category. These regulations were written by working with some different state regulations. The CSPC, Chuck and other staff members attended e-bike events at Sea Otter, and I actually attended the World Championships for mountain bike in Mount St. Anne last year that actually held the first e-bike mountain bike world championship, where they had some different policies put into play, and we used those to tool our regulations. So Chuck, you want to pipe in here?
Yeah, sure, Justin. Thanks. This is something the industry is interested in. A lot of riders are as well as events, and we've tried to take a pretty progressive look at this. Take a look at the policy we've got. We've got some best practices we're rolling out on this as well. The main points are we don't want e-bikes racing with normal bikes. I think we can all agree that's not fair, but we want to give them an opportunity. Outside of our race events, just for your information, so we're talking Grand Fondo events as an example, or charity rides, we are allowing e-bikes to combine at the discretion of the organizer in those cases. They're going to have some latitude to do that. Within true races where license is required, it has to be a separate event. That can be a separate event that's separated by minutes out on the course at the same time. Probably the biggest things is there's a couple of different classes of how we judge these things. An event like Sea Otter, which is a pretty high-end e-bike event, World Championships, there's a lot of focus on those, and the organizers have decided to, just as with time trials as an example, take a little stricter viewpoint on what they're allowing. We actually work with the organizer, provide some basic checks, tech checks on it. We look at the winners' bikes afterwards to make sure they haven't been tweaked. There's some ways to do that, and that's done in conjunction with the organizer. Frankly, at local events, a lot of what you all will be seeing, if there is an e-bike category, it's as simple as looking if there's a Class 1 sticker on the bike. Those are federal guidelines. As you can see here, there's required stickers by the federal government, and you can do a simple check pretty much to make sure that the bike is meeting standards. The other sort of important part of this is, as with everything else, our rules do not override Forest Service, Park Service, or local rules. So if a bike is not allowed, for instance, on a trail system, unless as part of the permit that landowner has allowed that, then they can't have the race. And that's not necessarily something for the officials. It should be handled in the permitting process, but I do want to bring that up. And I'll tell you, the races I've attended have been pretty cool. It's a neat part of our sport. We'll see how it does and how it grows. And it's something the manufacturers are definitely interested in. So we've been involved with the industry on that. So Justin, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, and just the last thing that I'll add in here is, as officials, you're never, as Chuck mentioned, your job is to check that sticker if asked. You're not going to be involved in the testing output. One of the things we saw in Mount St. Anne was that we had mechanics and engineers actually there testing the output of these bicycles and their effective engines. So officials will not be involved in that testing or verification process. But you may be asked to help with rollouts to verify that the entries are correct. Or one of the things that we used was an impoundment of the bikes and wheels post-testing to make sure that no changes were done after those engineers tested the output. So we'll go ahead and move on to track. Most of the regulation changes here in track were due to UCI changes. So there's not a lot of earth-shattering changes here. It's just trying to simplify these and make sure they're matching the UCI regulations. We do have, I believe, Andy McCord on. So if we do have any specific questions in regard to track, Andy is an international commissary in track. So he may be able to pipe in and answer any questions that we have if Chuck or myself can't answer them. So the first one there, the blue band, it has been updated to explicitly state that it's not a part of the racing surface. For most track pros, obviously pros being used lightly there, they understand that and they know. But one of the confusing pieces for new riders and parents or spectators has been that, is the blue band a part of the racing surface? Can I race? And the answer is no. So that was written in and changed to make sure that that was explicitly stated, that you can ride below the measurement line, but never on that blue band. Obviously, accidental occurrences may happen, but we have written in those penalties that are defined as warning, regulations, and disqualifications, which would be based on the seriousness of the offense and if any advantages were gained. Next, in the individual pursuit qualification rounds, we added in that it clearly defines what happens if a rider is caught. They are not allowed to repass and must maintain their status behind that opponent to the end of their qualification ride. As you know, it is a timed process. What we don't want to see is those riders intentionally slowing up to be passed, draft, recover, and then repass for a potentially better time. This is something that's assumed by most people, but now it's explicitly written and we no longer have to worry about, well, it's not in the rulebook loopholes. Next is in the Elite National Championship Team Pursuit. This was a specific match to the UCI regulations that in the event, in the semifinal 1 versus 4 and 2 versus 3 round, that if both teams are to catch their opponent, what happens? And it's been written in to state that in that event, both teams will move on as assumed, but their qualification time will be used to seed them for that finals round to determine who goes on the front stretch and who goes on the back stretch for their start. In the team sprint, clarification was added to specify the number and placement of the pads, so only 3 pads are to be used, placed at 5, 10, and 15 meters from the pursuit line. This was added to match the UCI regulations, and from a comment or a conversation I had earlier today, it was mostly revolving around a safety issue, as it's a little dangerous to replace pads in corners during racing. So it's safer to replace fewer pads, and they're right on the front stretch. So we'll go ahead and move on. 2 clarifications in the Madison regulations. The first one basically allows local track directors to run a Madison and define results in their local ways. At championship events, it's defined as the standard UCI based on the number of sprint points and points earned by laps taken. But at the local events, we have seen that some of the promoters like to run it just based on a distance and some other ways. So just giving them that ability to run the events like they normally do out and not be against USA Cycling regulations. The other one with Madison was clarifying how many sprints or the distances between each sprint based on the track length. So this is written into the regulations now, but for an under 200 meter track, sprints are every 15, 2 to an under 333 is every 10, for a 333 it's 6, and for an over 400 it's every 5 laps. If in the event that the race distance is not evenly divisible, those extra laps are going to be run before the first sprint. And the last point of clarification is just in terms of the international tempo race. We made sure to define the distance requirements for men elite, women elite, men junior, and women's junior, which is 10, 7.5, 7.5, and 5 kilometers respectively. The one piece I don't have on here that we're not going to discuss at length currently is the changes to the junior nationals. These came, which is basically a combination of the 11 to 16-year-old events omnium to make them standardized across the board. They came from the suggestions from our sport committee and our Olympic development program coaches. So if you are unfamiliar with those, take a look online and reach out if you have any questions on those. And that is everything with track. Did we have any questions there that we need to have Andy pipe in on? Okay, we'll move on. Next is mountain bike, my specialty, my bread and butter here. We actually didn't have much to change. One of the changes was in regard to downhill events. We have updated the language to match the UCI regulations. What the regulations did state is that if a rider in a downhill event was to exit the course, they had to re-enter the course in the exact same location. This has been edited to a softer term, meaning between the same 2 stakes, which makes it much easier for our judges on course or additional riders who may be our eyes out on course to explain that a rider easily, yes, they entered back on the course between those same 2 stakes in the general location. It was very difficult to define exact on course, and how does a course promoter or a course on-course official or a course marshal define the exact location to a rider. The other major clarification and edits were to our dual slalom regulations. Thank you, Stephanie, or excuse me, thank you, Leslie. We did a lot of talking after our national championships in Winter Park due to an issue that we had not seen. The idea behind this was to make sure that we could hand these regulations to officials who had never seen a dual slalom race and allow them to run an event from a regulations perspective. A lot of people don't see them, as we typically only have them run at national championships, Sea Otter, and collegiate, and then some other international Red Bull competitions. At Winter Park, specifically what happened is we had a rider crash in the semifinals. So we did not specifically state how to handle that rider in terms of where they would be placed in the final write-up of the standings. So we were able to make it work, but now it is written in that your regulations are based on that final round reached. So we matched them, or we modeled the regulations on the UCI 4-cross and cross-country eliminators, which are very similar in the run of show and results calculation. So there was no need to recreate the wheel, so we just modeled it off of that. So now we have written regulations on how to create complete results top to bottom for regardless of the number of entries, because we have seen recently that some of our dual slalom fields are exploding in number of size. So wanting to make sure that whether it's first place or last place, we can get them the correct and right position. This is super important, especially at collegiate events where points determine the results for both individual and team standing. So that is all that we had there. Chuck, do you have anything to pipe in, or?
Probably, if anybody's on the phone, you can unmute yourself using, I believe it's *6. Anybody else can use chat. I notice we do have an invader from Canada. Mr. Adrian Levesque has made his way, infiltrated into our webinar somehow, so I do want to point that out. But you guys feel free to send chats, or if you're on the phone, I think it's *6 to unmute yourself. And otherwise, if you ever have any questions on any of the regulations, feel free to use the officials at usacycling.org email, and those questions. I did make the notes that people had for recommendations, Steve, including yours about the language. We'll take a look at that and go from there. So David asked about changes to CX rules. No, we don't. And David, when those generally change on a little bit of a different tempo with the UCI, we do update those sometimes at a different point of the year through the board, and we'll send an update if we see that. That's another one we try to keep up with the international regulations. Edward asked, could we explain UCI race categories overlap with the current USAC structure? The term UCI uses with category, they use the term category as we do. Their term of category is more what we call a class. So a UCI categories, for instance, junior women, junior men, elite women, masters men, U23. So you can actually be a category 5 in our, or novice, excuse me, a novice in our system and be an elite man in the UCI system. So when you see a UCI category that says elite on it, all that is an age category. I hope that helps. So our category structure of numbers plus novice is outside of that system. If you want to get really granular, we do have some restrictions on who can race, for instance, masters categories. Those are all covered pretty well in the regulations. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, interesting comment on our dear Canadian Adrian Levesque. In our last webinar that we had, we also had a Canadian invasion from our dear friend Jordy Ma. So it seems we always get at least one.
Jeff Wu is Canadian as well. He just lives here, so we take him. All right. Well, it looks like we don't have much more coming in on chat. So
perfect. Well, appreciate everybody for coming along on a Friday afternoon. Again, just if you have any questions or anything ever comes up, feel free to reach out to us at that officials@usacycling.org email address. It just makes things simple. Both Chuck and myself keep an eye on it. So whether you're looking, if you're looking for one or the two of us specifically, just shoot that along individually. But if you're unsure who it should go to, just send it to there and we'll make sure it gets to the right place. And lastly, I'm about to put up on the regulations page an overview of all of the changes for this year that include some of the smaller definition updates that we didn't touch on in the call here. So if you're curious about that, take a look at the regulations page and it'll be an explanation of the 2020 changes.
And Justin, I also got a request separately to put this deck up as well, so let's get the PowerPoint posted.
Okay, perfect. Cool. Well, thanks everybody, and have a great weekend and stay safe, and hopefully we can get back to bike racing soon. So have a good weekend, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, guys. Stay safe. Take care.